So would you say that Frannie's experiences are largely representative of Black women of the period, or does her character have certain dispositions or privileges because she has a white father and is mixed race instead of having a Black father?
I think one of the very key areas in which Frannie's experiences were not representative is obviously the fact that she was highly educated and highly literate, and that she had access to all of the quality literature of the time and free rein to indulge her love of reading and to develop that, and to become a writer as well. And none of those things were really available. I mean, there was, there were one or two exceptions, but most Black people who had access to education and were able to write found themselves in a position where they had to write only about the emergency of slavery, essentially. So they had to write either slave narratives or abolitionist material. And so Frannie was different because, and as she herself says in the opening of the novel, she wasn't interested in that. She was interested in exploring, in telling her life story, not in telling a slavery story. It was very unusual, and what interested me about trying to think about what her experience would have been like is that it would have been both positive and negative. I think the assumption would be that it would be a good thing to be educated to that level in her position at that time. But in fact, what struck me when I was thinking about her character and developing her character was that what would have happened to her would have been that she would have had the doors thrown open to a world that she wasn't welcome in, that she would have felt a strong attraction to all of these things, but nowhere for that to go. And that would have actually created a lot of frustration. Ultimately, she says reading was the best thing and the worst thing that ever happened to her.
So, in a way, it was of advantage that she was presumably light-skinned, right? Especially when she moved through London and let into certain circles and some society.
Interesting that, because I think if I dealt with that, I dealt with it only subconsciously. But when I look at the book now, what I see is that Frannie is both advantaged and disadvantaged by the fact that she is biracial. Because on the plantation, she's very isolated and excluded. She is shown favor because she is brought into the house, and that was the position of many, as they were called, mulattas at that time. And she's allowed to do the kind of lighter work, the housework, as a maid instead of being outside in the fields. But she doesn't form relationships with the other slaves on the plantation who shun her for many reasons, but one of them being that she is different, she's visibly different. And then when she comes to England, she is seen as Black, but not quite Black. She's seen as an oddity by people who want to examine the origins of skin color and feel like she's a sort of perfect experimental example of, what they called racial mixing. And that doesn't really work to her advantage either. She's exploited for that reason. And then even the attraction that her mistress feels towards her is this kind of exotic, exoticized attraction. Her mistress talks about her skin being the color of almonds, and so she becomes quite objectified even by the person who loves her and is attracted to her. And so she doesn't really ever quite fit into either of the worlds that she occupies, either the white one or the Black one. And I suspect that is something that she has in common with many biracial people, certainly biracial people in the Caribbean.
So are you saying that Frannie's experiences may be reflected in biracial people's experiences today as well?
I mean, I don't want to speak for biracial people because I'm not biracial, but I think it's fair to say that is how biracial people describe their experiences, some of them. And it's certainly how, in the course of my research, how it seemed that many of them would have felt. And so many many biracial people in the early 19th century would have been the children of their owners. So they would have had the added complication of that difficult relationship with their father or father figure if they weren't acknowledged, as well as having some kind of facility and ease in navigating in the sort of world of the planters and the colonials, but not being quite accepted in the world of the slaves. So I don't want to presume to speak for all biracial people or biracial people today, but I think what became very clear to me during my research was that there were many difficulties faced by biracial people in the early 19th century that would have been unique to them. In particular, the fact that many of them would have been the children of their owners, which would have brought its own kind of set of complications. But that would have given them access to certain things that black people would not have had, that might have caused some resentment towards them on the part of their fellow slaves, but also allowed them to be on the fringes of a world that didn't quite accept them fully. And that does seem to connect a bit with the way that I have heard biracial friends describe their experiences in the modern context.
It's also very telling that we talk of Frannie as a black woman when she is actually biracial, you know, and I find that so interesting. And that whole, like when you mentioned that things have not really changed that much from then till now, and those advantages that are given or not or denied, depending on the skin tone or shade or the deepness of the brown that is in the skin. It has to, I found that, like, it reminded me of what I've been observing as an outsider in our current society as well.
I mean, and we still have this problem, you know, we've come a long way. And even in my lifetime, I think it's remarkable how far we've come in terms of being proud of being black or mixed race. But there's still this sense that lighter skin is better, curlier, silkier hair is better. And it is prevalent not just in the white community, but in the black community as well. And we do ourselves a disservice with that. You know, there are all of these very minute distinctions, but yet to the outside world, you know, black, mixed race people might be considered or viewed as black. And I think Frannie had that experience, that certainly when she comes to England anyway, people aren't worrying about her parentage on the street. She's, you know, when she's walking around with her black friend Sal, they're lumped in together as outsiders, and, you know, they're subject to all of the experiences of immigrants and told to go home, and, you know, the racism that they encounter. You know, because she's navigating the world with those reactions, she sees herself as black as well in the novel, and she writes from that perspective.